A millionaire marries his maid for revenge, but she's not who he thinks she is. It was the kind of wedding you only see in magazines, the kind that makes little girls dream and grown women ache. A sprawling cathedral bathed in light. From 1,000 white roses, crystal chandeliers hanging like frozen tears, and the quiet hum of old money echoing through the marble. But amidst the splendor stood a bride who looked like she had wandered into the wrong fairy tale. Her dress, though expensive, hung oddly on her, as if borrowed. Her hair was stiff, pinned too tight, and her eyes weren't joyful. They were bracing for something cruel. Before we continue with the story, tell us where you're watching from. Now sit back, relax, and enjoy the story. The crowd stared, not at her, but through her, searching for meaning in what they saw. Mary Collins, the maid. The plain, mousy girl who used to clean their shoes and dishes, now marrying Edward Lancaster. The billionaire with eyes like steel and a name that opened every door. Whispers filled the pews like smoke. Is this a joke? Where's Charlotte? Why her? Edward stood still, expression carved from ice. He didn't look at Mary. He looked past her at someone in the crowd, someone who wasn't supposed to be here. Among the guests, sitting near the front in a blood-red dress, was Charlotte Davenport, stunning, smug and composed. The woman who had shattered Edward's heart just 1 year ago, leaving him days before their wedding to marry his business rival instead. But today, she had come to see the spectacle, the downfall. Or so she thought. Edward's jaw tightened as the priest spoke the vows. Mary's voice trembled when she said, "I do." But she said it, and Edward said it back, with lips that didn't smile and eyes that didn't blink. As applause filled the church, Mary blinked up at him, searching for something, anything, behind his blank stare. His hand was cold in hers. No kiss, no warmth, just duty. And when they walked down the aisle, the cameras flashed like lightning, but Mary felt no magic. Only confusion. Only cold. That night, in the honeymoon suite of the Lancaster estate, Edward poured himself a drink, loosened his tie, and stood by the window without speaking. Mary sat on the edge of the bed, clutching the lace of her gown, unsure whether to cry or scream. "Why me?" she finally asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "You could have anyone. Why would you choose someone like me?" He turned slowly, glass in hand. "Because you were available," he said flatly, "and disposable." Her heart stopped. His voice wasn't cruel. It was indifferent, as if she were a chair or a vase, something he'd picked out without much thought, but there was something else in his eyes, a shadow, pain maybe, or anger. He left the room, leaving her alone in the silence of silk and shame. 3 weeks earlier, Mary had been cleaning the chandeliers in that same mansion, unnoticed, invisible, a maid among many. She'd grown up in foster homes, surviving off quietness and small dreams. Books, tea, silence. When Edward first approached her, kind, reserved, she thought it was a mistake. But he had been charming, attentive. He had asked about her dreams, and she had told him about her longing to belong, to be seen. She had never suspected he was orchestrating a performance, a cruel revenge, a carefully crafted act. But something didn't add up. Why go this far? Why marry her, legally, publicly, just to prove a point? To whom? And why did he always glance toward Charlotte when he thought Mary wasn't looking? The following morning, Mary found herself in a silent dining room, eating alone. No Edward, no explanations. Only the clinking of silverware and the weight of a wedding ring that felt like handcuffs. She began to explore the house, once familiar, now foreign. And in the east wing, behind a door she had never been allowed to open, she found a room, untouched, locked in time. A nursery, empty, but carefully maintained. Toys still arranged, dust-free. a photograph on the shelf of a boy, with storm-grey eyes and a woman with Mary's smile. Her heart twisted. She didn't know why. She wasn't supposed to be in this room, but something pulled her toward it. That night, she asked the housekeeper, an older woman named Lillian, about the room. The woman paled. "That's not a place we speak of, dear," she said, then quickly left. Mary's mind raced. Every time she felt close to understanding something, the answer slipped further away. Meanwhile, Edward met Charlotte at a private club downtown. Their conversation was civil, venom disguised in pleasantries. "Congratulations," Charlotte said with a smirk, stirring her wine. "She's homely but obedient, I assume." Edward smiled without humor. "I didn't marry her for looks or obedience. I married her because you taught me the value of illusions." Charlotte's eyes narrowed. "You don't love her." "I don't need to," he said. "Love is a currency I stopped believing in when you sold it for shares in my father's company." Charlotte's smile faltered, but only for a second. Back at the estate, Mary sat on the balcony, staring out at the city lights. She didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. Her heart had been traded in a transaction she didn't understand, but she was beginning to see the cracks in the perfection. In Edward, in herself. She wasn't going to wait for permission to find the truth. She was going to earn her place, or burn it down. And far beneath the mansion, in a locked drawer Edward hadn't opened in years, lay a letter, unopened, addressed to Mary Collins. It had been 3 days since the wedding, and Mary hadn't spoken more than a dozen words to Edward. Their conversations were fragmented, cold, clipped exchanges during brief encounters in vast rooms. The mansion, with all its gilded edges and echoing corridors, felt less like a home and more like a museum of mistakes. But Mary had learned to live in silence before. She would learn again. Still, something gnawed at her. Something about the way Edward looked at her, not with cruelty but calculation, as if she were a puzzle he expected to solve, or worse, dismantle. Each morning she woke alone. Edward was gone before the sun rose, slipping out into the city without saying where he was going or when he'd be back. And every night she sat alone at the dinner table, picking at food she didn't recognize and enduring the weight of stares from the staff, who once called her one of us. She didn't cry. Not yet. Crying would be admitting that the fairy tale was fake, that she was nothing more than a prop in someone else's play. She wasn't ready for that, not until she had answers. One evening, while exploring the library, a grand 2-story cathedral of books, Mary noticed something strange, a small locked drawer in the writing desk near the fireplace with a brass plate that read, "Private." She ran her fingers along the edge. She wasn't the snooping type, but something told her that drawer wasn't just hiding old letters or ledgers. There was a weight to it, a gravity, and so she searched the desk for a key. She didn't find it that night, but she would come back. Across town, Edward sat in a dimly lit office, eyes locked on a screen, rewatching security footage from the wedding. Not of the ceremony, but of the crowd. He zoomed in on Charlotte's expression, frame by frame, watching her reaction as he slipped the ring onto Mary's finger. He didn't smile, not once. He didn't enjoy it. He was just waiting. But for what? His assistant, James, entered quietly. "She's asking questions," James said. Edward didn't look away. "Let her. The more she digs, the more she'll find reasons to walk away." "You want that?" James asked. Edward didn't answer. Later that night, Mary returned to the library and found the drawer open, unlocked. Inside was only one item, a letter aged and folded. Her name written in precise cursive across the front. Her breath caught. She recognized the handwriting. It was the same style she had seen once years ago on a form at the orphanage. Trembling, she opened the letter. The first words stopped her heart. "My dearest Mary, if you are reading this, then I am gone." It was from her father, a man she never knew, a man no one ever spoke about. He wrote of mistakes, regrets, a fortune stolen from him by men he once called brothers. He wrote of betrayal. But what haunted her most was the final line. "There is more to your blood than you know. The Lancaster name owes you more than silence." Mary sat frozen, the letter burning her fingers. The Lancaster name. Edward. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about history, and maybe justice. Her heart pounded in her chest, but the questions came faster than the answers. Who was her father to Edward, and why had this letter been hidden? The next morning, Edward returned home to find Mary waiting in the hallway, holding the letter. Her posture calm, her eyes unreadable. "Is there something you want to tell me?" she asked, offering the envelope. Edward took it, but didn't open it. His face betrayed nothing. "Where did you find this?" "In the library, your drawer." He nodded once. "You weren't supposed to read that." "Because you were afraid of what I'd learn," she pressed. He met her gaze. For the first time, there was a flicker of emotion behind his eyes. "Because I was afraid of what it would make you become." They stood there, two strangers tied by paper and silence, until Edward walked away, letter in hand. He didn't say thank you or sorry, just disappeared into his office. Mary watched him go, but this time she didn't feel small. She felt seen, or maybe just dangerous. She went back to the nursery later that day. This time she searched the shelves more thoroughly. Behind a stack of children's books, she found a faded photograph. Two young men standing together, one of them unmistakably Edward's father. The other was the same man from her father's medical file. Her father and Edward's were once friends, or allies, or something else. She couldn't piece it all together, not yet, but the timing didn't feel accidental. And her marriage, it wasn't a coincidence. It was part of something older, deeper. That night, Lillian knocked on her door. "He used to cry in that nursery," the older woman said quietly. "When his brother died, when his mother left. The boy you married wasn't always ice." Mary hesitated. "What happened to him?" Lillian's eyes dimmed. "He grew up with a father who believed softness was weakness, and he buried his love beneath loyalty." Mary barely slept. She was starting to see the layers. Edward wasn't just punishing Charlotte. He was punishing the world that told him vulnerability was a sin. But in doing so, he had become what he feared most. The next morning, Edward found the letter burned, ashes in the fireplace. "You destroyed it?" he asked. Mary looked him in the eye. "No, I freed it. Whatever your father did to mine, I won't let it be the only story written." He studied her, searching for the girl he thought would be easy to control. She wasn't there anymore. The house felt colder after the ashes. Edward hadn't spoken to Mary since the fire. He hadn't asked why she destroyed the letter, nor had he shown any signs of anger. He simply retreated, into silence, into himself. But his absence was louder now, more personal. It wasn't indifference anymore. It was discomfort. Mary sensed it in the way he looked at her when he thought she wasn't watching, as if she'd stopped playing the role he wrote for her, and he didn't know what came next. That uncertainty, it scared him. She could see it. Mary, meanwhile, had stopped waiting for explanations. She began to take walks outside the estate grounds, exploring the hills that overlooked the city. Fresh air felt like rebellion. Each step away from the mansion was a step back into herself. At a nearby bookstore, she picked up novels about power, legacy, and corruption. She was searching, not just for answers, but for language, for tools. She was tired of being the girl in the shadows. She wanted to understand how men like Edward became who they were, and how women like her survived it. Back home, Edward stood in his father's old office, staring at the portrait above the fireplace. Harold Lancaster, a man whose image loomed larger in death than he ever had in life. Edward poured a glass of scotch, something his father once called the taste. Of men who matter, he hated the burn but drank anyway. His mind wandered back to Mary, to her voice as she said, "I freed it." That voice had no tremble, no fear. For the first time since this twisted game began, Edward wondered if he was the one being played. Later that night, Mary received an anonymous envelope under her door. Inside, a photograph of her mother, younger, brighter, standing next to Edward's father at a gala decades ago. Written on the back were just 2 words. They knew. Mary's stomach dropped. Who sent this? Lillian? James? Edward himself? No one had motive except those with guilt. But why now? Why feed her truth in pieces? She tucked the photo into a book, heart racing. Every new answer only opened more doors. And the one question she feared most still hadn't been asked. Who am I, really? The next morning, Mary requested a car. Edward refused, through his assistant, of course. He didn't even speak to her directly. He says if you need something, ask him in person. Mary didn't flinch. That night, she knocked on his door. No anger, no pleading, just presence. Edward opened it, surprised. She didn't wait for permission. She walked in. "I want to visit the orphanage," she said. "I want my records." He leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "You think there's more to find?" She met his gaze. "I know there is. The question is, are you ready for it?" For a long beat he said nothing. Then, "I'll take you myself." Mary blinked, not expecting that. He walked past her, already making the call. The next morning they drove together in silence. Through the city, through the past. The orphanage hadn't changed. Yellowed bricks, creaking doors, and the same scent of dust and sterilized memory. Inside, the director recognized Mary instantly. "You always sat in the back during story." "In time," he smiled, eyes like questions. Edward watched her as if seeing her for the first time, not as a pawn, as a girl who had known too much loneliness. In the archives, Mary sifted through old files, name after name, most forgotten. Then she found hers. Tucked inside the manila folder was a birth certificate, but something was missing. "No mother's name?" she whispered. Edward leaned in. "That's unusual." A note, paper-clipped to the back, read, "Brought by family friend." Father confirmed. No maternal info provided. Mary stared at it. "Why would he erase her?" Edward murmured. "Or maybe he didn't know." Mary shook her head. "No, a man like my father wouldn't leave blanks. Someone else did this." And for the first time, she looked directly at Edward. "Was it yours?" He didn't answer, but his face cracked. Just a little. Back in the car, Mary stared out the window, holding the file to her chest like armor. Edward gripped the steering, wheel tighter than necessary. "You think I knew who you were before all this?" he asked. "Did you?" She countered, eyes still on the road. "No," he said, "not until the week before I asked you to marry me." The silence that followed was heavier than any answer. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because the truth complicates things," he muttered, "and I wasn't ready to see you as a person." The words cut deep, but Mary didn't react. Not outwardly. Inside, a storm raged. He had seen her as a tool, a statement, a message sent to a woman he no longer loved but couldn't stop needing revenge against. She wanted to hate him. But hate wasn't what she felt. What she felt was worse. It was understanding. She saw now that Edward was broken just like her, only he'd been handed power instead of pain. And he'd used that power to hurt. That made him dangerous. But it also made him familiar. That night they sat across from each other at dinner, not as husband and wife, not as enemies, but as two people slowly unmasking. Mary put down her fork. "Tell me the truth," she said. If Charlotte hadn't left you, would you still have chosen me?" Edward looked at her for a long, long time. Then finally, "No, but that's not the truth that matters now." She leaned in. "Then which one does?" He didn't answer, but for once he looked like he wanted to. It was a Thursday when she returned. Charlotte Davenport stepped out of a matte black luxury car, wearing red, not a subtle red, a red that meant war. The gates of the Lancaster estate opened without resistance. Of course they did. She still knew the codes, still walked like she owned the marble beneath her heels. Mary saw her from the second-floor window, descending the grand staircase just as Charlotte crossed the foyer. Lillian tried to intercept her, but Charlotte waved a delicate hand. "Tell Edward I'm not here for a fight," she smiled. "I'm here for closure, and I brought a gift." Edward met her in the drawing room with the expression of a man who's already exhausted by the storm before it rains. Mary lingered just behind the wall, not hiding, but not announced. She had no intention of interrupting, not yet. She wanted to hear all of it. "You look tired," Charlotte purred, crossing her legs. "Marriage not treating you well?" Edward didn't rise to her bait. "Why are you here?" She reached into her bag and pulled out a flash drive. "Because I know what you're doing, and I thought you'd want to see what I've found before someone else does." Edward didn't move. "Go on." Charlotte leaned forward. "I ran a background check on your charming little wife. Did you know her father once co-owned 40% of Lancaster Industries before he disappeared?" Edward's face twitched. "That information was sealed. Only legally," Charlotte smirked. "But you forget, I'm married to a man who doesn't believe in boundaries or laws." She dropped the drive on the coffee table like a dagger. "You thought using her would hurt me, but you've tied yourself to something bigger, and you don't even see the fire you're sitting in." Mary turned and walked away before she could hear more. Not because she was afraid, but because she didn't want to give Charlotte the satisfaction of watching her listen. Upstairs, in the quiet of her room, she sat at the vanity, not to do her makeup, but to see herself, to truly look. She touched the mirror. "I'm not just your wife," she whispered. "I'm your reckoning." She didn't cry. She didn't scream. Instead, she pulled out the photograph again, the one with her mother and Edward's father, and stared at it until the lines blurred. That night, Edward didn't come to dinner. Again. But Mary didn't wait for him. She ate in the dining hall alone, the clinking of her spoon against porcelain echoing like footsteps in an empty church. Lillian entered after dessert, hesitant. "She's back, isn't she?" Mary looked up. "She never left." "Not really." Lillian hesitated. "You should know. Charlotte visited the estate a week before you were hired. She met with Mr. Lancaster privately. After that, he changed, started asking questions, started watching you." Mary's heart slowed. "You think she planted the idea?" Lillian nodded once. She knew exactly how to hurt him. Hours later, Edward appeared outside her room. No knock, just his shadow in the doorframe. "You heard her," he said. "Not a question." Mary didn't move. "I heard enough." He stepped inside, his posture less composed than usual. "She's trying to shake you." "Shake me. Don't let her win." Mary laughed softly, bitter. "Win what, Edward? I didn't even know I was in a game until after the wedding." He sat on the edge of her window seat, staring out at the moonlight. "I was going to annul it," he said suddenly. "The marriage, after a few weeks, that was the plan." Mary crossed her arms. "And now," his voice was quieter than she'd ever heard it, "now, I'm not sure I want to." She studied him, unsure if it was honesty or manipulation. "Why not?" He didn't answer. She waited, but he only looked down. "You're not the only one who's been lied to," he whispered. "My father. He told me your father betrayed him, that he embezzled, that he ran." "Did he?" Mary asked. I don't know, Edward said, but I'm starting to think the version I grew up believing wasn't the truth, or at least not the whole of it. The next morning, Mary woke early and walked the halls alone, her mind replaying Charlotte's words. She wasn't just dealing with a wounded man. She was trapped in the legacy of two powerful families built on secrets. She went back to the library, this time pulling out old press clippings from the locked cabinet. One article caught her. Harold Lancaster acquires remaining shares from partner after sudden exit. The partner wasn't named, but the date matched her father's disappearance. Coincidence was a coward's excuse. This was deliberate, engineered, erased. She brought the article to Edward that evening. "Do you still believe your father was innocent?" she asked. He looked at the paper, then at her. "I don't know what I believe anymore." She placed it in front of him. "Then it's time we both start finding out." He didn't stop her when she left the room. For once, he looked like a man who wanted to follow, but didn't know how. Meanwhile, Charlotte made another call, this time to a reporter. "Yes," she said smoothly, "I've got a story for you, but it's not about Edward, it's about his bride. You'll want to hear this." Awesome. Now it's time for Chapter 5, where things escalate further. Mary's identity begins to surface in the public eye. Edward is forced to confront what he's been running from. Charlotte begins pulling strings outside the mansion, and we introduce new information that deepens the mystery around Mary's parents, giving us our first big reveal. It started with a headline: "The Billionaire, the Maid, and the Missing. Millions, what Mary Collins doesn't know about herself." Mary saw it the next morning, displayed on every newsstand she passed. Her photo, from the wedding, lips pale, eyes wide, was plastered beneath bold red letters. The article hinted at hidden fortunes, forgotten bloodlines, and a possible scandal buried by the Lancaster family. But what caught her attention wasn't the headline, it was the byline. Charlotte had given the story to a journalist she once mentored, a woman known for making whispers into wars. Edward was livid, not because the press found out, but because they were digging faster than he could cover. "You think I told them?" Mary asked as he slammed the article on the table. "I know you didn't," he growled. "She's doing this. She's dragging us into the spotlight." Mary folded her arms. "No, she's dragging you. I was already a question mark the moment you chose me." Edward looked at her then, really looked, and for a second, Mary thought. She saw regret flicker across his face, but just for a second. "We need to talk," he said. He took her to a private study she hadn't entered before. The walls were lined with thick files, floor to ceiling. "My father's archive," Edward explained. "He kept every letter, every deal, every betrayal, including what happened with your father." He pulled a folder from the shelf. One, marked Alderson Collins. Inside were court documents, forged bank statements, and a single envelope that had never been opened. Mary recognized the handwriting instantly. "That's my father's," she said. Edward hesitated. "I never read it." She snatched it before he could change his mind. Her hands trembled. "Mary, if you ever read this, it means you've come looking. Good. That means you're strong. I was framed, and the man who did it was the man I once trusted with everything, Harold Lancaster. He told me he'd protect you, but I know better than to believe a Lancaster promise. The truth is hidden in the ashes of my final project. He burned it, but ashes don't lie. Go to the house in Wrenhill. The blueprints are buried in the cellar floor. You'll know what to do." Mary folded the letter slowly, her pulse racing. "There's a house," she said, "in Wrenhill. That's where it started." Edward frowned. "That place has been abandoned for years." "Then it's time someone remembered it." She stood. "I'm going." "Not alone," Edward said quickly. Mary tilted her head. "Why not? You brought me into this, but you still don't trust me to finish it." "Because someone already knows what's buried there." he said. And if Charlotte leaked the article, she knows more than she's saying. 3 hours later, they were on the road. Wren Hill was a forgotten town nestled between crumbling hills and fog. The air smelled of rust and pine. The Collins house sat at the edge of the woods, old, broken and silent. Mary stepped out first, clutching the letter in her coat pocket. "I remember this place," she whispered. Edward stood behind her, quiet. "You were here?" "Once, before the orphanage. It's a blur, but this house, it smells like my mother's perfume. That scent, lavender and something old, clung to the peeling walls like a ghost refusing to leave. They broke the cellar door open together. The air inside was damp, thick with mildew. Mary descended first, flashlight in hand. The floor was dirt, half dug in places, clawed by time and memory. She knelt down, hands shaking, and started digging. Edward joined her. For 20 minutes they scraped in silence until her fingers hit something hard. Wood, then metal, a rusted toolbox. Inside, a sealed blueprint tube yellowed by age. Mary opened it carefully, and what she saw made her gasp. It wasn't just a house design. It was a patent for a clean energy tech schematic, signed by Alderson Collins. Edward's blood ran cold. "He designed this before my father's clean energy project launched, and then he vanished," Mary whispered. "Because your father took this, made it his." Edward sat back, stunned. This would have made him a billionaire. Instead, he was erased. Mary looked at him. "And now I'm married to the man who bears the thief's name." Edward didn't argue, didn't defend. He just nodded slowly. "We have to go public," Mary said. "Let the world know what really happened." Edward didn't answer immediately. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet. "If you do that, my name dies." Mary rose. "Then maybe it should." Back in the car, neither of them spoke for miles. The silence wasn't angry. It was sobering, like the kind of quiet that follows a storm you barely survive. Mary watched Edward from the corner of her eye. He looked smaller now, not weaker, just human. And she hated that a part of her still wanted to comfort him. That part had to die. When they returned home, a package was waiting. No sender. Inside, another photograph. This time, it was a funeral, Alderson's, but the coffin was empty. In the background, standing in the corner, was a child, his face eerily familiar. The back of the photo was blank. Mary stared at it for a long time, then placed it in a drawer, away from the others. Some answers, she realized, only asked more questions. Mary hadn't slept since Wren Hill. She kept the blueprint rolled beside her bed, a strange kind of talisman, proof that her father was more than just a name lost in dusty records. It was the only tangible thing left of him. It meant he had mattered. It meant he had fought to leave something behind. Edward hadn't spoken much since they returned. He'd retreated to his father's study again, poring over documents, whispering phone calls behind locked doors. Mary no longer asked where he was going. She knew now that answers didn't come freely in this house. They had to be pried loose, like secrets from stone. The house was different now. The silence no longer protected Edward. It wrapped itself around Mary instead, like armor. She moved through the hallways as if the mansion itself were hers. The staff had stopped avoiding her. Some even nodded when she passed. She noticed the way Lillian lingered in doorways, watching her like a mother who feared and admired what her daughter was becoming. But the shift was clearest in Edward. He had stopped trying to control her, maybe because he knew he couldn't, or maybe because he no longer wanted to. The day after they returned, Mary received a phone call from an unknown number. The voice on the other end was male, gentle, British. "Miss Collins," he said, "my name is Henry Blackwell. I used to work with your father." Mary froze. How did you find me? Because I never stopped looking. And now that the article's out, it's safe for me to speak." He paused. "Your father kept journals, proof, but he made me promise to keep them hidden until the day someone came looking. You're here now, so they're yours." The line went quiet for a moment. "But you're not alone, are you?" Mary's pulse jumped. "What do you mean?" "They're watching you, all of you. Charlotte's not working alone." Before she could ask more, the line went dead. She stared at the phone like it might come alive again. Then she looked at the walls, every mirror, every camera, every painting with eyes that could hide lenses. Who else is in this house? That night, she confronted Edward in his study. "Who's Henry Blackwell?" she asked. He looked up, startled. "Where did you hear that name?" "He called me. Said he worked with my father. That there are journals, that Charlotte isn't acting alone." Edward stood, pacing. "Blackwell disappeared after my father accused him of laundering money. He was supposed to testify. Then he vanished." "Because your father made him vanish?" Edward flinched. "I don't know. But if he's back, that means someone else is too." Mary frowned. "Who?" Edward hesitated. "My brother." A silence fell. Mary's voice dropped. "I thought he was dead." Edward nodded slowly. "So did I." He walked to a drawer, unlocked it, and pulled out a photo, grainy, black and white, a young boy, about 10, standing next to a slightly older Edward. "He disappeared the night our mother left, the same night your father fled." He handed her the photo. "I never believed it was a coincidence, but I couldn't prove anything. Now, I'm not sure what to believe." Mary studied the boy's face, the jawline, the eyes. They were too familiar. "Edward," she said slowly, "I think I've seen him." She reached into her drawer and pulled out the photo from the funeral, the one of the child in the background. Edward's hands trembled when he took it. "That's him," he whispered. "That's Elijah." He looked up. "Which means he's alive." He turned to Mary, his voice tight. "We're being watched from the inside." Suddenly, every creak in the house felt intentional. Every locked door, every misplaced object. Mary remembered something. Just days ago, she had found a room she'd never seen before, behind the linen closet. A small door painted shut. She hadn't thought much of it. But now, it might be more than a forgotten room. That night, she returned alone, flashlight in hand. It took her nearly an hour to crack the paint and break the lock. When the door opened, stale air poured out. A staircase descended into darkness. It wasn't a storage room. It was a tunnel. She hesitated only once, then stepped inside. The tunnel curved beneath the estate like a root system, branching in, directions she couldn't trace. But after several turns, she found something shocking: a chair, a small desk, an old typewriter, and a wall lined with photographs of her, of Edward, of Charlotte. And at the center, burned slightly at the edges, was the blueprint. Someone had broken into her room, had copied it. Mary stared, heart racing. Her life had been watched, dissected, catalogued. Why? She turned to leave and froze. Footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming from above. Mary ducked behind the desk, heart pounding. A shadow fell across the stairs, and then nothing, just silence. The kind that feels thick with presence. After a long moment, the figure left. Mary waited another 5 minutes before bolting back up the stairs and sealing the door behind her. When she finally reached her room, she collapsed against the door, breath shaking. This wasn't just a family secret anymore. This was surveillance. This was sabotage. This was war. The next morning, Mary stood in front of the hallway mirror, staring at her own reflection, as if it might blink first. Something about the image didn't sit right. Her face looked the same, tired, drawn, but sharper. It wasn't vanity, it was vigilance. She had entered this house a ghost, but now the mirror couldn't ignore her. Still, her thoughts drifted back to the tunnel, the photographs, the shadow, the unspoken threat. Whoever was watching her wasn't just gathering information. They were orchestrating something. She could feel it like static beneath her skin. Edward hadn't slept either. When she found him in the conservatory, his shirt was wrinkled, his sleeves rolled, and his eyes unreadable. "It wasn't just a room," Mary said quietly. "There's a tunnel beneath the house, and someone's living in it." Edward didn't blink. "I know." She stepped back slightly. "You knew?" "Only recently," he admitted. "When I started finding things out of place. Doors unlocked, files moved. I had James sweep the property. He said nothing was there, but he exhaled. He lied." Mary's voice was low and calm. "Why would your assistant lie to you?" "Because," Edward said, "he doesn't work for me anymore." That sentence sat in the air like a cold knife. "Then who does he work for?" Edward didn't answer, but Mary already knew. Charlotte. Of course it was Charlotte. The timing, the leaks, the shifting alliances. It all pointed to her. But what didn't make sense was why. Why go to such lengths? Mary was no longer just a pawn in Charlotte's vendetta. She was the leverage, the key. And now someone was closing in on that key fast. That afternoon, while Edward left to confront James, Mary stayed behind and began combing the house room by room. In the upstairs gallery, she stopped in front of a large oil painting, one she'd walked past 100 times. It had always been just a blur of muted blues and golds, a portrait of Edward's mother and 2 sons. But now, her eyes caught something new. The boy on the right, younger, smaller, smiling wide, was wearing a red cord bracelet on his wrist. It was identical to the one in the funeral photograph, the one the child had worn. Mary's heart kicked. Elijah. The boy in the painting was the same boy at the funeral, which meant the child hadn't died. He had vanished. But why would a family as powerful as the Lancasters fake a child's death? Unless they hadn't. Unless only one person had known the truth, and the rest had been made to forget. She stepped closer, pressing her fingers to the edge of the frame. That's when she noticed it. The corner of the painting had been recently moved. The wall behind it slightly scuffed. She ran her hand along the frame and felt the catch of a hidden latch. With a soft click, the painting swung open like a door. Behind it, another staircase, not as old as the tunnel, but narrow, winding, downward into silence. Mary hesitated only a moment before descending. The stairs led to a small chamber, part vault, part hideaway. At its center, a single chair, and on that chair sat a man. He was young, early 30s, unshaven, pale, with eyes that burned too brightly in the dark. When he looked up, Mary's breath caught. "Hello," he said, calm, measured. "You're real." She stepped back. "Who are you?" "I'm the one your husband doesn't want to find." He stood slowly, hands raised. "I'm Elijah." Mary stared. Every feature matched the photos, only older, sharper, haunted. "You're supposed to be dead," she said quietly. "So are a lot of people in this house," Elijah replied. "But here we are." She narrowed her eyes. "Why are you hiding?" "Because hiding keeps me alive." He walked toward a shelf, pulling down a weathered journal. "I know who your father was. I know what he built. I know why they took it from him." He tossed the book into her hands. "And I know what Charlotte wants to do with it now." Mary opened the journal slowly. Schematics, names, codes, conversations, dates that overlapped with her father's disappearance. "Charlotte wants to recreate this?" she asked. "No," Elijah said darkly. "She wants to sell it to the highest bidder. He stepped closer, voice low. "And she needs you to unlock it." Mary's throat dried. "Me? You're the heir," Elijah said. "Your father encoded part of the blueprint in your name, in your bloodline. That's why Charlotte leaked the story. She's drawing you out, making you run. And when you're scared enough, you'll hand it over." Mary backed away, clutching the journal. "And what do you want?" "To burn everything down," Elijah said. "All of it. The Lancasters, the Davenports, the empire built on ashes, including this house." She turned and ran. Back upstairs, breath ragged, Mary locked the secret door and rushed down the hall. She needed Edward. Now. Not because she trusted him, but because Elijah had just declared war. And war didn't wait for the truth. She found Edward in the main hall, arguing with James, who looked cornered, pale, undone. Mary shoved the journal into Edward's hands. "He's alive," she said, "and he wants to destroy everything." Edward looked at the journal, then at her. "Who?" She met his eyes. "Elijah." Edward didn't speak for a long time. He stared at the journal in his hands like it might explode. His fingers traced the worn leather, eyes flicking over the faded title written in Mary's father's scrawl. Then he looked at her, truly looked at her. "Elijah's alive?" She nodded. "I saw him. He's been living beneath your house, watching you, watching us. He knows everything." Edward ran a hand through his hair, eyes burning with something between disbelief and dread. "That's not possible. I buried him." His voice cracked. "I put him in the ground." Mary took a breath. "You buried a coffin, not him." James, who had been silent until now, backed away. "I didn't know." "Don't!" Edward snapped. "Don't pretend innocence." James looked pale. "Charlotte said he died. She said it was over." "Charlotte lies for a living," Mary muttered. Edward turned to her, jaw clenched. "What did Elijah say?" "That he knows the blueprint is coded through me, my bloodline, that my father didn't just design a clean energy device, he encrypted it into something biological. That's why Charlotte leaked the article. She wants me scared, vulnerable, ready to hand it over." Edward looked stunned. "So she's not trying to expose you, she's trying to flush you out." Mary nodded. "And use you to get to me and Elijah. He wants to burn everything, starting with you." The words hung like smoke in the room. Edward lowered the journal. "Then we have no choice." Mary raised a brow. "To do what?" He looked her dead in the to find the blueprint, the real one, before anyone else does. The next 12 hours moved like war prep. Edward cleared the estate of all non-essential staff. James was fired. Lillian was placed under protection. Security cameras were replaced. Doors sealed. And in the middle of all of it, Mary watched him work, not as a cold-blooded strategist, but as a son unraveling his father's legacy one lie at a time. At one point, Edward stopped in the hallway, out of breath. Mary approached him slowly. "You okay?" He looked at her, hollowed out. "He was my little brother, Mary. He used to follow me everywhere, and I failed him." Mary placed a hand on his shoulder. "You didn't fail him. Someone did. But that someone wasn't just you." Edward shook his head. "When my mother left, Elijah changed. He got quiet. I thought it was just grief. But I found her journals once. She wrote that he wasn't hers." Mary blinked. "What?" "She suspected he was adopted or stolen. My father would never admit it, but she wrote that she saw him deliver a baby in secret. A woman, no name, just a red cord on the child's wrist." Mary's blood turned to ice. "The bracelet," she whispered, "the one Elijah wore." Edward nodded. "I thought it was a family charm, but it wasn't." Mary's voice shook. "What if Elijah isn't your brother?" Edward looked up. "What if he's yours?" The question shattered the air like glass. "No," Mary said. "That's impossible." "Is it?" Edward said. "Think about it. Your mother vanished. Mine left suddenly. Elijah disappears, then shows. But your father's funeral. What if your father saved him from mine?" Mary backed away, overwhelmed. "Then who am I, Edward? Who was my mother?" He looked at her with something close to sorrow. "Maybe the one person who could end all of this." That night, Edward and Mary revisited the journal together, dissecting every entry, every map, every scribble. Near the back was a code Mary had never seen before, a long sequence of letters and numbers. Edward leaned forward. "That's DNA sequencing." Mary's pulse raced. He encoded the final key into someone's DNA. "Not someone," Edward said. "You." Mary leaned back. "So I'm the password." He nodded slowly. "To a technology people would kill for. Which means, Mary, you're the most dangerous person in the city." Outside, headlights pierced the fog. A black car pulled to the edge of the estate, engine idling. Inside, Charlotte sat in the back seat, staring up at the house. She held a phone to her ear. "She has the journal," she said calmly. A voice on the other end responded, garbled. Charlotte smiled. "Then it's time to speed things up." Inside the house, Mary looked out the window, eyes narrowing. "She's here," she whispered. Edward moved beside her. "What do you want to do?" Mary turned toward him. Her voice was quiet, resolute. "I want to stop running." It was Mary's idea to invite Charlotte inside. "No games," she said, "just a conversation." Edward stared at her like she'd lost her mind. "She's not coming here to talk, Mary." "I know," she said simply, "but I want to see her eyes when I say no." Edward hesitated, then nodded once. "I'll stay close." But Mary shook her head. "No, you won't." The staff set the dining room with silent elegance. Long white candles, silver cutlery, no wine. Mary sat at the head of the table, spine straight, hands steady. She wore a black dress, nothing flashy but sharp, calculated. Her hair down for the first time in weeks. When Charlotte arrived, she walked in as if she'd never left. Red lips, flawless coat, amusement painted across her face. "You've redecorated," she said, slipping into the seat opposite Mary. "Minimalist, very orphanage chic." Mary didn't react. "You've been busy." Charlotte smiled. "I've always been busy. Power's a full-time job." "You sent the article to the press, planted James in the house. You even gave Edward the idea to marry me." Charlotte leaned forward. "You should be thanking me. You've never been more seen in your life." Mary's voice was ice, seen like a trophy or a trap. Charlotte poured herself water and swirled it like wine. "Do you know what your father almost did to this world? He wanted to hand the future to people who couldn't afford to own it. A future without gatekeepers. He was going to kill the market." Mary raised an eyebrow. "You mean level the playing field?" Charlotte laughed softly. "That's not how power works. There always has to be a ceiling, and someone has to stand on it." Mary leaned forward now. "You're not scared of the blueprint, are you? You're scared of what it represents, that someone like me, unpolished, uninvited, could hold the key to everything." Charlotte's smile faded. "You're not dangerous because of your bloodline, Mary. You're dangerous because you still think people like Edward can be saved." Mary tilted her head. "And you don't?" Charlotte's eyes sharpened. "I stopped believing in salvation the day I realized love is just leverage with a heartbeat." Mary stood slowly. "We're done here." But Charlotte didn't move. "He's still lying to you." Mary's hand froze on the back of her chair. "About what?" Charlotte placed a flash drive on the table. "There's a file. From his father's private archive. It explains what happened the night your father vanished, what Edward knew, what he did. Mary didn't touch it. "You're bluffing," Charlotte smirked. "Then don't look. Ignorance is the closest thing we get to peace." Mary didn't blink. "You're afraid of me." "I'm afraid of what you might choose." Charlotte stood. "Because if you side with him, Mary, you'll never stop running." Mary watched her walk away, heels clicking like punctuation in a sentence she hadn't finished writing. That night, Mary sat in her room, staring at the flash drive. She didn't plug it in. She didn't need to. Not yet. Instead, she opened her journal and wrote 2 questions. 1. What else has Edward buried? 2. If I find the truth, what will I become? Meanwhile, in Edward's study, he paced. The journal lay open, a set of documents beside it, pages Mary hadn't seen, pages from his father's sealed vault. The truth Charlotte had hinted at. The blueprint wasn't just encoded in Mary, it was divided into 2 lines of DNA. One from Alderson Collins, one from someone else, and the second line belonged to Harold Lancaster. Edward's hands trembled. He encoded part of it in me. Suddenly the door creaked open. Lillian stepped inside, eyes wide, hands trembling. "Sir, he's back." Edward straightened. "Who?" "Elijah," she whispered. "He left something in Mary's room." Upstairs, Mary returned to her bedroom to find the window open. The wind had blown her curtains loose. On her pillow sat a small cassette tape. No label, no note, just silence pressing against it like a threat. She locked the door, drew the blinds, and inserted it into an old player she'd found in the cellar days ago. The tape hissed. Then a voice spoke. "You think you know the truth, Mary, but the real secret isn't who stole from your father. It's who tried to silence him. Not Harold, not Charlotte. It was someone closer. Someone still in the room when the lights go out." The tape ended. Mary sat frozen, and then, from the hallway outside, a scream. The scream echoed through the corridor like a rip in reality. Mary threw open her door, heart hammering. The hallway was empty, but the sound had come from nearby. She ran, feet bare against marble, following the trail of something that didn't feel physical. She found the source in the servants' wing. Lillian knelt beside the lifeless body of one of the guards, his eyes wide open, mouth frozen mid-breath. His throat was slit. No signs of struggle, just precision, just silence. Edward appeared seconds later, face pale, hair unkempt, a gun in his hand. "Who did this?" Lillian shook her head. I don't know. I heard something. Then the scream." Mary looked at Edward. It was a warning. He swallowed. "From Elijah?" "No," she said, her voice flat. "This wasn't his style." Edward frowned. "Then who?" Mary met his eyes. "Charlotte's not working alone anymore." They sealed the mansion, doubled security, moved Mary to a room with no windows. But it didn't matter. The house wasn't safe anymore, not because someone had entered, but because someone had never left. The cassette tape still sat on her desk, its message gnawed at her. The real secret is who tried to silence him. Not Harold, not Charlotte, someone still in the room when the lights go out. She spent the next hours scanning every page of her father's journal again, searching for names, phrases, hidden meanings. In one corner of the final entry, scribbled in faint pencil, was a phrase she hadn't noticed before. "Don't trust the one who brings you tea." Her blood froze. Lillian. Mary rose, heart shattering in her chest. Not Lillian, not the woman who had tucked her into bed when she was still a maid, the one who'd given her birthday biscuits. But the more she thought about it, the more the pieces slid into place. Lillian had always known which doors stayed locked. Lillian was the only one who'd entered the room before she found the journal Lillian had told her to avoid the east wing. Where Elijah hid, Edward didn't believe it at first. "She raised me," he whispered. "She raised you to obey," Mary said coldly, "not to question." They confronted her that night. Lillian didn't run, didn't cry, just stood in the center of the sitting room with her apron perfectly ironed, like a soldier at attention. "Why?" Edward asked, voice breaking. Lillian looked at him like a mother looks at a son she failed. "Because he asked me to." "Who?" Mary demanded. She smiled faintly. "Your father." Silence hit like a hammer. "Harold knew," Lillian said. "He knew Alderson had created something too powerful, so he ordered me to find the blueprint, and when I couldn't, he told me to break the man instead." Mary's voice was ash. "You gave false testimony." "I gave silence," Lillian said. "That was enough." Edward's gun hand trembled. "You helped him bury it." "I protected you," she snapped. "You think I wanted this life? Watching you turn into him, watching her become what she was never meant to be." Mary's voice cracked. "And what's that?" "A mirror." It wasn't rage that made Mary step forward. It was grief. Grief for the girl who had trusted someone in this house, who believed kindness wasn't conditional. "You'll leave tonight," she whispered. Lillian raised her chin. "You'll regret this." "No," Mary said. "You will." That night, Edward came to her room. No pretense, no guarded silence, just two people who had both lost a part of themselves. He sat beside her on the edge of the bed. "I thought she loved me," he said quietly. "She did," Mary replied. "Just not enough to save you." They didn't touch. They didn't need to. For the first time, Edward looked vulnerable, human, and Mary. She felt steady, like the storm was no longer something to fear, but something she was. He handed her a file. "This was in my father's archive." She opened it. Inside, 2 DNA reports. One for her, one for him, side by side. At the bottom, a highlighted phrase. "Compatible biological encryption confirmed. Joint activation required." Mary swallowed hard. "He encoded the blueprint into both of us. We can't unlock it unless we're together." Edward nodded. "Which means, if one of us dies, it dies with us," she finished. She looked at him then. For everything he was, everything he wasn't, and everything they had become. "We have the power to rebuild the world," he said. Mary shook her head. "Or burn it down." Rain lashed the windows the next morning. Not a soft rain, a violent, slanted storm that felt like the sky itself had finally cracked. Mary stood in the greenhouse, staring through the glass as the world turned to water. In her hand was the DNA file Edward had given her, edges worn from being clutched too tightly, too long. The blueprint wasn't just a legacy. It was a lock, and she and Edward were the only two people on Earth who could open it. That meant she had two options: use it or destroy it. Edward entered quietly, soaked from his walk across the property. "They've found the prototype," he said. Mary turned. "Where?" "A warehouse in the industrial district, one my father used during the final years. Elijah left a message there, scrawled on the wall." "What did it say?" Edward's eyes were storm dark. "Tell her to choose." Later that afternoon, they drove in silence through the city. Everything felt tighter now, like the whole world was holding its breath. The warehouse stood at the edge of the docks, surrounded by rusted fences and thick fog. Inside, it smelled of oil and secrets. A single bulb hung from the ceiling, casting harsh shadows across the floor. At the center, a table. On it, the prototype. Compact, cold, waiting. Beside it sat another envelope, this time addressed to Mary. She opened it slowly. Inside, a single page, handwritten. "If you turn it on, they'll come for you. If you burn it, you'll never know what your father died for. But if you bury it, you'll be free." No signature, no threat, just truth stripped bare. Edward picked up the device. "We could finish what they started." Mary shook her head. "Or repeat it." He studied her. "Do you trust me?" She didn't answer, Back at the estate, the storm only worsened. The moment they returned, a call came in, private, encrypted. Edward answered, expecting Charlotte, but it wasn't her. It was Elijah. And he wanted a meeting. "Neutral ground," Elijah said through static. "The chapel, midnight, bring her alone." Edward looked at Mary. "We don't go. It's a trap." But Mary stepped forward. "No, we go, but on my terms." She sent Lillian's former security team ahead, silent, hidden. Then she dressed simply, tied her hair back, and took the flash drive Charlotte had left. "I need to know," she said to Edward. "No more maybes, no more shadows." He tried to stop her, but she touched his hand, not tenderly, not coldly, just firmly. "Stay close, but let me walk in first." The chapel sat on the edge of the estate, long abandoned, walls cracked by ivy and time. Inside, candles flickered against old pews. At the altar stood Elijah, hands in his coat, eyes burning with something deeper than rage. It was pain, ancient, untouched. "You came," he said. Mary stepped forward. "I read the journal. I saw what they did to you." Elijah tilted his head. "Then you know the truth." "No," she said softly. "But I know you were broken, just like me." He walked down the aisle slowly. "You think this ends with forgiveness? I think it ends with a choice." She handed him the flash drive. "The last piece, it's yours, but if you activate it, everything burns, including you." Elijah took it, held it, but didn't move. Then, "I'm not the one who pulled the trigger," he said suddenly. Mary frowned. "What are you talking about?" "Elijah?" Edward's voice echoed from the shadows, but it was too late. Elijah stepped closer, voice like a dagger. "Your father didn't die in exile. He didn't vanish in fear. He was executed." Mary's world tilted. "No," she whispered. Elijah nodded. "Shot in the back, inside Wrenhill, not by my hand, but by someone wearing a Lancaster ring." She turned to Edward. He shook his head slowly. "I didn't know." But she was already stepping back, breathing hard. "You knew this was a possibility," Elijah said. "You married into the bloodline that erased your father." Mary's voice cracked. "I need proof." Elijah reached into his coat and handed her a photograph, grainy, dark, but clear. A man in a Lancaster coat, gun drawn, her father's silhouette falling. It wasn't Harold, it wasn't Edward, it was someone else, Charlotte. Mary's knees nearly gave. The chapel pulsed with silence. "She did it," Edward whispered. "She killed him, and she blamed my father." Mary staggered backward, tears she hadn't earned welling in her eyes. "Then this isn't a war of legacy," she said. Elijah nodded. "It's a war of justice." He dropped the flash drive into her hand. "Now choose, Mary. Rebuild what they tried to steal, or burn it all down." She looked at Edward, looked at Elijah, then at the prototype. Mary didn't sleep that night. The flash drive felt heavier than metal, heavier than truth. It was a symbol, a threat, a chance. And somewhere deep in her gut, it felt like a weapon no one should hold. She sat alone in the East Wing, beside the broken portrait of Harold Lancaster, staring into the fireplace like it could answer the questions echoing inside her chest. The storm outside had passed, but the air inside the house still felt electric, the kind of silence that comes right before something breaks. Edward found her at dawn. He didn't speak, he just sat beside her. No suit, no armor, just a man stripped down to guilt and bone. "I didn't know she did it," he said. Mary nodded. "But you knew someone did." He closed his eyes. "I didn't want it to be her." Mary looked down at the prototype between them. It was always her. They sat like that for a long time, the only sound, the fires. Gentle crackle. Then softly Mary said, "If I bring this to the world, everything changes. Energy, politics, borders. And if you destroy it," Edward asked, "I become just another woman who buried a miracle." He turned toward her slowly. "So what will you do?" She looked at him. Her voice was clear. "I don't know." And for the first time, since the wedding, he believed her. Meanwhile, in a room 3 floors below, Charlotte was already moving. She'd been hiding in plain sight since the chapel. Elijah let her go, a decision she'd predicted. She knew he wouldn't shoot her, not yet, but now she was done watching, done waiting. If Mary wouldn't destroy the blueprint, Charlotte would do it herself. Publicly. On her terms. With a narrative the world could digest. The dangerous device, the unstable heiress, the tragedy that never should have happened. She made her way into the secured wing, bypassed the biometric locks, and entered the vault where the prototype was held. But something was wrong. The safe was open. The prototype gone. Charlotte froze. Then a whisper from behind. "You always wanted the ending, didn't you?" She turned. Elijah, gun drawn, calm, steady. "I told you," he said. "I'm not my father. I don't lie." Charlotte narrowed her eyes. "You won't." "Shoot me." He nodded. "No, but I won't stop someone else from doing worse." Suddenly, a second figure stepped out from the shadows. Mary. Her eyes weren't soft anymore. They weren't sad. They were something new, forged. "Do you want the truth, Charlotte?" she asked. "You killed my father. You nearly destroyed Edward. You've used every piece of this story to write yourself in as the hero." Charlotte didn't move. Mary stepped forward. "But you forgot one thing. The girl you left invisible. She's the one who has the pen now." Charlotte lunged, desperate, not graceful, reaching for the drive in Mary's hand. But Mary didn't flinch. She let her take it. Charlotte stared down at it, confused. Then Mary said, "I already copied it. This one's empty." Charlotte looked up, realizing too late. Edward stepped into the room. "No more lies," he said. "No more second chances," Charlotte screamed. "You'd believe her over me." Edward stepped beside Mary. "I already did." Charlotte turned, ran. But Elijah was faster. He didn't shoot her. He didn't touch her. He simply closed the door behind her, locked it, and whispered, "You'll stay here until the world forgets your name." Back upstairs, Mary stood before the real prototype. The copied flash drive, encoded with her father's true design, was safely tucked away. She held it above the fire. Edward watched her. "It's your call." She looked at the flames, then back at him. "You know what this could fix," he said. She nodded. "But it won't fix me." He stepped closer. "What do you mean?" Mary's voice cracked. "I still don't know who I am without this story, without this war." Edward took the drive gently from her fingers, held it, and then he dropped it into the fire. It sizzled, curled, burned. Mary's breath hitched. "You just—" "Yes," he said. "I thought I had to make the choice," she whispered. Edward looked at her, soft and steady. "You already did. You chose not to be them." Silence fell. Then tears, not loud, not dramatic. Just soft, honest. She leaned into him, and for once they didn't talk. They just were. The fire was still crackling when Mary woke. She had fallen asleep on the floor beside Edward, her cheek resting against the velvet arm of the old Lancaster sofa. The entire house was silent. No alarms, no footsteps, no plotting behind closed doors. For the first time since the wedding, the mansion felt still. But it wasn't peace. It was after. And after always carries weight. She stood, slowly, eyes fixed on the blackened hearth. The flash drive was gone, burned down to metal and ash. The only copy of the blueprint was destroyed, and with it her father's life's work. She should have felt free, or righteous, or at least resolved. But what she felt instead was hollow, like the war had carved out everything inside her except the scar. Edward stirred. His voice was rough with sleep. "You regret it?" She didn't answer right away. Finally, "Not yet." He nodded. "That's the right answer." She turned to him. "And you?" He looked away. "I've made more mistakes than I can count, but letting it die wasn't one of them." They spent the day in separate wings. Neither ran, neither hid. They simply processed. Mary walked the halls like she had when she was still the maid, barefoot, quiet, unnoticed. Only now, it was her house, not by title but by truth. She wasn't just part of this place, she was what survived it. In the courtyard, she found Elijah. He sat beneath the old iron tree, sketching something on a notepad. An old habit he hadn't lost. When he saw her, he smiled faintly. Not the smirk of a man with secrets, but the tired smile of someone who had run out of anger. "You came back," she said. "Didn't know where else to go," he shrugged. Mary sat beside him. "You okay?" He glanced at her. "Are you?" They sat in silence for a while. Then he said, "You didn't have to burn it." "I did," she replied. "Why?" She looked up at the branches above them. "Because I didn't want to build something my father died to protect, only for it to be used the same way by someone else." Elijah nodded. "You're stronger than him, you know." "No," Mary said. "Just luckier. I survived long enough to choose differently." He pulled something from his coat. A photograph creased and faded, their mother, younger, freer, before the silence swallowed her. "I found this in Wrenhill," he said. "There's more of her in you than in me." Mary took the photo gently. For a moment she said nothing. Then, "She would have hated this house." Elijah smirked. "Yeah, but she would have loved that you burned it down piece by piece." That night Charlotte was moved into federal custody. She had no allies left, no narrative strong enough to shield her from the truth. When she passed Edward in the corridor, flanked by guards, she didn't look at him. She looked at Mary and she whispered, "You'll build it again. They always do." Mary didn't answer, but she knew Charlotte was wrong. Because, this time, the hands on the blueprint were gone. There was nothing left to steal. Later, Edward joined Mary on the rooftop. The sky above them was bruised purple, the stars smudged behind drifting clouds. He handed her a box. She opened it slowly. Inside, her wedding ring, the one she hadn't worn in weeks. He met her eyes. "I didn't earn a second chance, but I'm not asking for one." She studied him. "Then what are you asking for?" He exhaled. "A beginning. Not as Lancaster, not as legacy, just Edward." Mary looked at the ring, then at her hand, then back at him. "I don't know what love is anymore," she said. "That's okay," he replied. "Neither do I." She smiled for real this time. "Then maybe we can find out together." The letter arrived 3 days later. No return address, no stamp. Just a single sheet of heavy cream paper slipped beneath the study door. Mary found it before anyone else. She recognized the handwriting immediately. Elegant, exact, government. She opened it slowly. The words were brief. "Miss Collins, the Department of Energy requests your presence in Washington. We understand the destruction of the Collins Lancaster prototype. We would like to offer funding, protection, and a private team to help rebuild it on your terms. The future still needs what your father created." Mary stared at the letter for a long time, then folded it, burned it, and never spoke of it again, because choice wasn't about power anymore. It was about silence, and what you choose not to carry forward. But the world was already changing. The media spun a dozen stories. Heiress, Burns' invention worth billions, the bride who broke the code, Edward Lancaster steps down. But no one knew the truth. Not really. And that's how Mary wanted it. Still, she couldn't stop thinking about the girl she used to be, the one who cleaned chandeliers, the one who said yes to a stranger with a ring and a wound, the one who thought love was a transaction. She stood in front of her old maid's closet that afternoon, the one she hadn't opened in months. Inside were the uniforms, the cracked shoes, the silence. She ran her fingers across the fabric, then closed the door gently. She wasn't that girl anymore, and she wasn't a Lancaster either. She was something in between, unwritten. Later, Edward approached her in the atrium, where sunlight poured through the glass like soft forgiveness. He handed her a file. "What's this?" she asked. "My resignation." Mary opened it. Inside, papers dissolving his family trust, donating half the Lancaster fortune to renewable energy funds, all anonymously. "You're giving it up," she said, stunned. He nodded. "My father used it to control. My brother tried to burn it. You gave me a reason to release it." Mary sat beside him. "You really think this will fix what they broke?" "No," he said, "but it might stop someone else from bleeding." They sat in quiet for a while before he turned to her. "Are we still married?" Mary smiled softly. "We are. But we never—" She stopped him. "Let's not define it. Let's just live it." That evening, Elijah prepared to leave. He was headed north. No destination, just movement. That's how he healed. Mary walked him to the gate. "You sure you don't want to stay?" she asked. He shook his head. "Too many ghosts here." "Maybe that's why you should stay," he smiled. "Maybe that's why you shouldn't." They hugged. No ceremony, no tears, just warmth. Before he left, he placed a worn journal in her hands. "The last one," he said. Mary looked down. Her father's final words, pages she hadn't seen. Elijah's voice was quiet. "It's not about blueprints, it's about forgiveness." Then he was gone. She didn't open it right away. The house was quiet, not empty, just different. The kind of quiet that comes when a storm has passed and the wreckage has been cleared and the ground finally knows how to breathe again. Mary stood on the balcony at dawn, wrapped in a simple cardigan, bare feet, against cold tile. Below her, the gardens were still soaked from last week's storm, dew hanging like silver threads across the grass. For once, she didn't think about what might happen next. She just watched the light return. Inside, the world had moved on. The story had faded from headlines. Other scandals had taken its place. Mary Collins, the girl who married a billionaire, burned a legacy and never spoke to the press, became a mystery the media couldn't touch. They speculated, they guessed, but she never confirmed or denied anything, because it wasn't their story, it was hers. In the East Wing, she finally opened the last journal Elijah gave her. Her father's handwriting greeted her like a familiar voice. "If you're reading this, it means you survived. That's all I ever wanted. Not for you to avenge me, not to rebuild what they destroyed, just to live, just to choose." She traced the letters with her finger, tears hot behind her eyes. "I buried my dreams in code, but I should have buried them in you, because you, Mary, you were always the real invention." She closed the journal and held it to her chest. For the first time, she understood. Her father hadn't died protecting a device. He died protecting a future, her. Later that day, Edward found her in the greenhouse. He didn't speak. He just stood beside her, arms crossed, gaze steady. She glanced at him, half smiling. "Still not wearing a tie?" He smirked. "Retired from pretending." She nodded. "Good." He pulled something from his coat pocket, a small ring box. Mary raised a brow. "Is this a proposal?" He shook his head. "It's a return." Inside the box wasn't a ring. It was the key to the old Lancaster vault. "The house is yours," he said. "I'm moving out." She looked at him, surprised. "You don't have to," she said. "I do," he replied gently. because I don't want to be another part of your story that asks you to carry it." They stood in silence. Then she stepped closer. "Tie or no tie," she whispered, "you're not the same man who married me." He met her eyes. "And you're not the same woman who said yes." She reached into her pocket and handed him something, the burnt flash drive, charred, symbolic. "Keep it," she said, "to remember what we chose not to become." That evening, Mary walked the estate one last time before closing the main wing. The staff had left. The legacy was buried. There were no more ghosts to chase, just light and choice. In her room, she packed only what mattered. Her mother's photo, Elijah's drawing, the final journal. She paused at the closet, the one with the maid's uniform still hanging inside. She reached for it, folded it, laid it on the bed, then sat beside it, remembering. That girl, forgotten, unseen, used, had become something no one expected, a woman with no past, and a future only she could write. Mary stepped into the hallway, locked the door behind her, and walked into the golden light of evening. Not as a Lancaster, not as a legacy, just Mary. And for the first time in her life, she didn't need anyone's permission to begin again. If you've made it this far, let us know what you thought about the story. And if you're not subscribed, yet don't forget to subscribe to catch all our upcoming stories.